Welcome back to another mystery story. Today we uncover the fatal film premiere. Dive into this cozy noir mystery and stick with us till the end, where every shadow hides a stunning secret. In the sultry haze of a 1952 New York summer, the Rialto Theater's marquee glowed like a beacon of secrets, promising a night of cinematic shadows and whispered threats. Amid the glitter of Broadway's elite, a dagger waited in the dark, its blade laced with a poison as silent as the flicker of the projector. Someone in the velvet-draped crowd, starlet, director, or unseen phantom, knew the script would end in blood. And as the reels began to turn, the stage was set for a murder that would unravel a web of deceit as intricate as the film itself. Chapter 1. The Velvet Rope Beckons. The summer of 1952 draped New York City in a cloak of muggy discontent. The kind of heat that made your shirt cling like a guilty secret and turned every breath into a negotiation with the atmosphere. It was the evening of July 12th, and I, Archie Goodwin, found myself standing outside the glittering facade of the Rialto Theater on Broadway. My fedora tilted just enough to keep the neon glare from stinging my eyes. The air buzzed with anticipation, thick with the scent of perfume, cigar smoke, and the faint tang of asphalt, still warm from the day's sun. Tonight was the premiere of Shadows of Deceit, a noir thriller that had the town's gossip columns chattering like a flock of caffeinated sparrows. I wasn't here for the popcorn or the flickering romance of the silver screen. No, I was on the clock, hired by Elias Hawthorne, a producer with a bankroll bigger than his ego and a problem that smelled like trouble. Hawthorne had cornered me 2 days earlier at the bar of the Churchill Hotel, his manicured hands clutching a martini like it was a lifeline. "Goodwin," he'd said, his voice low enough to dodge eavesdroppers. "I need you and that fat genius of yours, Nero Wolfe, to keep an eye on my star, Vivian Lark. She's been getting threats, nasty ones, anonymous notes, phone calls in the dead of night. Someone's got it in for her, and with the premiere coming, I can't take chances." He slid a crisp $100 bill across the bar, followed by a contract for Wolf's services. The fee was steep, 10 grand plus expenses. But Hawthorne wasn't the type to haggle over pocket change. His film was his golden ticket, and Vivian was the face that sold it. "Just make sure she's safe," he'd added, his eyes darting like a man who'd seen too many shadows. Now, as I stood under the Rialto's marquee, the crowd swirled around me like a tide of sequins and ambition. Broadway premieres were a circus, and this one was no exception. Starlets in slinky gowns glided past, their laughter sharp as glass. Directors and financiers puffed on cigars, their voices loud with self-importance. Critics lurked in the corners, scribbling notes with the glee of executioners. I adjusted my tie, black, to match the mood of the film, and scanned the scene for Vivian Lark. She wasn't hard to spot. She stood near the velvet rope, a vision in emerald silk that hugged her curves like a lover's promise. Her brunette hair cascaded in waves, and her eyes, dark and liquid, seemed to hold secrets the script hadn't dared to write. She was the kind of dame who could make a monk forget his vows, but tonight she looked nervous, her fingers twisting a pearl bracelet as she smiled for the cameras. Next to her was Lance Beaumont, the film's leading man, a guy whose face was built for billboards. His jawline could have been carved by a sculptor with a grudging subtlety, and his charm was as polished as his patent leather shoes. Beaumont was the type who'd romance a lamppost if it wore lipstick, and his reputation for breaking hearts was only outdone by his knack for racking up debts. He leaned in close to Vivian, whispering something that made her laugh. A little too brightly, I thought. Behind them hovered Marcus Vale, the director, a wiry man with a face like a crumpled road map, all worry lines and sleepless nights. His eyes darted from Vivian to the crowd, as if expecting a ghost to step out of the shadows. Rounding out the inner circle was Rita Voss, the screenwriter, a lean woman with a cigarette dangling from her lips and a chip on her shoulder the size of Brooklyn. She'd fought her way up from the typing pool to get her name on the credits, and her sharp tongue was as famous as her scripts. I edged closer, keeping my distance but staying within earshot. The threats to Vivian had been vague but vicious. Notes slipped under her dressing room door, scrawled in red ink. Leave him or pay the price. Calls that woke her at 3 a.m., heavy breathing followed by a hissed warning to stay away. Hawthorne hadn't shared the details with the cops, not wanting the press to sniff out a scandal before the film's big night. My job was simple. Watch Vivian, spot anything suspicious, and report back to Wolfe, who was no doubt lounging in his brownstone, sipping beer and grumbling about the barbarity of motion pictures. He'd only agreed to the case because Hawthorne's check cleared faster than a Greyhound at Aqueduct. The theater doors opened and the crowd surged forward, a river of silk and ambition flowing into the grand lobby. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over marble floors, and the air was thick with the buzz of anticipation. I followed Vivian's group, noting the faces around her. There was Silas Grant, Beaumont's agent, a weaselly type with a pencil mustache and eyes that never stopped calculating. Otto Klein, the theater manager, was barking orders at ushers, his bald head gleaming under the lights. And then there were the hangers-on. Reporters, fans, and a few shady types who looked like they'd wandered in from a bookie joint. I memorized their faces, a habit from years of working with Wolfe. You never know when a stranger's glance turns into a clue. Inside the auditorium, the seats were plush red velvet, the kind that made you feel like royalty until the lights went down. I took a spot in the back, near the aisle, where I could keep an eye on Vivian's row. Third from the front, center. She sat between Beaumont and Hawthorne, with Vale and Voss a few seats down. The house lights dimmed and the projector hummed to life, casting a silvery glow over the screen. Shadows of Deceit began with the blast of moody jazz, all saxophone wails and muted trumpets. The film was pure noir, rain-slicked streets, a detective with a past, a dame with a secret, and enough double crosses to make a chessboard jealous. The plot followed a private eye, played by Beaumont, uncovering a forgery ring operating out of a movie studio. A setup that felt a little too close to home, given the crowd I was watching. The audience was rapt, their faces flickering in the reflected light. I kept my eyes on Vivian, who sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap. Beaumont slouched, one arm draped over the back of her seat, his grin lazy but possessive. Vale chewed his nails, and Voss lit another cigarette, ignoring the usher's glare. Hawthorne, up in the producer's box, was a silhouette against the balcony railing. Everything seemed calm. Just another night at the movies. Until it wasn't. About 40 minutes in, during a scene where Beaumont's character stalked the shadowy alley, a scream tore through the theater. It wasn't from the screen, where a gunfight was erupting in glorious black and white. This was real, raw, and close. The house light snapped on, harsh and unforgiving, and the auditorium erupted into chaos. People leapt from their seats, shouting, pointing. I shoved my way down the aisle, my heart pounding like a jackhammer. In the third row, Lance Beaumont was slumped forward, his white shirt front blooming red around a dagger buried in his chest. The blade was ornate, old-fashioned, like something from a pirate flick. its hilt gleaming under the lights. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, and his mouth hung slack, as if he'd been caught mid-quip. Vivian was on her feet, her hands pressed to her mouth, her scream still echoing. Hawthorne barreled down from the box, his face ashen. Vale was frozen, his eyes wide with horror. Voss dropped her cigarette, cursing under her breath. The crowd surged toward the exits, but I bellowed, "Nobody leaves!" A futile gesture, as panic doesn't take orders. Ushers scrambled to block the doors and Otto Klein appeared, shouting for calm. I knelt beside Beaumont, checking for a pulse. Nothing. He was as gone as yesterday's headlines. I scanned the scene. The dagger was no prop, it was real, sharp, and deliberate. Blood pooled on the velvet seat, stark against the crimson fabric. Vivian was trembling, her eyes darting to the crowd, as if expecting the killer to step forward and take a bow. Hawthorne grabbed my arm. "Goodwin, what the hell happened? Is he dead?" I said flatly. "And unless that dagger grew legs and jumped him, someone in this room did it." The police arrived within minutes, sirens wailing like banshees. Inspector Kramer, red-faced and already chewing an unlit cigar, stormed in with a squad of uniforms. He spotted me and groaned. "Goodwin, why is it always you? Where's Wolfe, hiding under his desk?" "Home, probably eating duck," I said. "I'm on protection detail for Miss Lark." "Didn't expect a murder." Kramer's eyes narrowed. "Protection, huh? Looks like you flubbed it." He turned to the crowd, barking orders to seal the exits and start taking names. I pulled him aside and gave him the quick version. The threats to Vivian, Hawthorne's contract, my presence. I left out Wolfe's involvement for now. Let Kramer stew, before dragging my boss into it. The coroner arrived, a doer man named Dr. Phelps, who confirmed what I already knew. Beaumont was dead, likely instant from the blade's angle through his heart. "No struggle," Phelps muttered. "He didn't see it coming." The dagger was bagged as evidence, and the crowd was herded into the lobby for questioning. Vivian clung to Hawthorne, her face pale but composed, like a star playing grief for the cameras. Vale was muttering to himself, pacing like a caged animal. Voss lit another cigarette, her eyes cold and calculating. Grant, the agent, was nowhere to be seen. Slipped out in the chaos, I'd bet. Klein was wringing his hands, insisting his theater was secure as Fort Knox. I slipped away to call Wolfe from a payphone in the lobby. Fritz answered, and I heard Wolfe's voice in the background, grumbling about interruptions. "Tell him it's urgent," I said. When Wolfe came on, I laid it out. Beaumont's murder, the dagger, the chaos. "Hawthorne's our client," I added. "He'll want you to dig into this." Wolfe's sigh was audible through the receiver. "Confound it, Archie." "Murder at a moving picture show. Utterly vulgar. Bring Mr. Hawthorne tomorrow, 11 a.m. And the others, Miss Lark, the director, the writer." "I assume there's a writer?" "Rita Voss," I said, "sharp as a tack and twice as prickly." "Very well." "And Archie, avoid further theatrics." I hung up, the receiver cold against my palm. Back in the lobby, the crowd was thinning. The police taking statements and letting stragglers go. Vivian was with a detective, her voice low but steady. Hawthorne caught my eye, his face a mix of fear and fury. "Goodwin, this is a disaster. The film's cursed now. The press will eat us alive. Not if Wolfe cracks it," I said, though I wasn't sure he could. This wasn't just a murder, it was a performance, staged in the dark for maximum effect. The killer had balls, I'd give them that. But who? A jealous lover? A cheated partner? Someone tied to those threats against Vivian? I stuck around until the cops cleared me, then tailed Vivian to her hotel, the Plaza, to ensure no one followed. She was shaken but safe. Her suite guarded by a private dick Hawthorne had hired as backup. I grabbed a cab back to the brownstone, the city's lights blurring past like a dream sequence. It was past midnight when I climbed the steps to West 35th Street, my mind racing with questions. Who'd wanted Beaumont dead? Why use a dagger in a packed theater? And those threats to Vivian, were they a smokescreen or part of the script? Fritz let me in, and I found Wolfe in the dining room, polishing off a plate of Fritz's roast duck with orange sauce, a glass of beer at his elbow. He looked up, his massive frame filling the chair like a mountain in a suit. "Report," he said, his voice a low rumble. I gave him the full rundown. The premiere, the crowd, the scream, the dagger, the suspects. Beaumont was a player, I said. Debts, affairs, enemies. Could be anyone. Vivian's threats might be connected, or not. Wolfe grunted, sipping his beer. Fouet, a theatrical murder for a theatrical man. The dagger, describe it, old, ornate, like something from a swashbuckler. Not your average shiv. He nodded, his eyes half closed. Mr. Hawthorne's film, what is its theme? Noir, detective stuff, forgery ring in a movie studio. Beaumont's character gets wise and gets whacked. Wolfe's lips twitched, a rare hint of amusement. Life imitates art, it seems. Tomorrow, Archie, we begin. Summon the principals. And do not drag me to that wretched theater. I grinned, pouring myself a glass of milk. Wouldn't dream of it. As I headed to bed, the city's pulse thrummed outside, a restless rhythm of secrets and shadows. Somewhere out there, a killer was laughing, thinking they'd pulled off the perfect crime. But they didn't know Nero Wolfe. And they sure as hell didn't know me. Chapter 2. The Brownstone Summons. The morning after the Rialto Theater murder, I woke to the smell of Fritz's coffee, strong enough to raise the dead, though it wouldn't do Lance Beaumont any good. It was July 13th, 1952, and the New York air was already thick with heat, the kind that made you wish for a cold shower in a colder case. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying the premiere's chaos. The scream, the dagger, Vivian Lark's pale face, and the crowd's panic. Nero Wolfe, my boss, and the only man I knew who could solve a murder without leaving his chair, was already at breakfast when I hit the dining room at 8 a.m. sharp. He sat like a Buddha in a bespoke suit, tackling a stack of pancakes with maple syrup and a side of sausage that Fritz had crafted into a minor masterpiece. Morning, I said, sliding into my chair and pouring coffee. You ready to dive into this mess? Wolfe dabbed his lips with a napkin, his expression sour as unripe persimmons. Archie, your enthusiasm for this theatrical debacle is unseemly. Murder in a cinema? A vulgar affront to civilized inquiry. Proceed with your report. I'd given him the bones last night, but now I fleshed it out over Fritz's pancakes. I described the Rialto's glitter, the suspects, Vivian Lark, Marcus Vale, Rita Voss, Elias Hawthorne, Silas Grant, Otto Klein, and the dagger, its ornate hilt glinting like a stage prop but deadly as a viper. Beaumont was a magnet for trouble, I said. Debts to gamblers, affairs with married women, and a habit of stepping on toes. The threats to Vivian might tie in, or they're a sideshow. Hawthorne's desperate to keep the film from tanking. He's coming at 11 with the others. Wolfe grunted, sipping his coffee. This film, Shadows of Deceit, its plot mirrors the crime. Close enough to raise eyebrows. Beaumont's character sniffs out a forgery ring, gets too close, and eats a bullet. Last night, he got a dagger instead. Coincidence? Pfui, Wolfe said, setting down his cup. Coincidence is the refuge of lazy minds. The killer chose the premiere for effect. Dramatic, public, calculated. We shall see what Mr. Hawthorne reveals. Before I could reply, the doorbell rang. Fritz answered, and in stormed Inspector Kramer, his face redder than a fire hydrant, an unlit cigar clamped between his teeth. He didn't bother with pleasantries, planting himself in the doorway like a bulldog staking a claim. Wolfe, you overstuffed fraud. What's your angle on this Beaumont murder? Goodwin was at the scene, and I'm betting you're already meddling. Wolfe's eyes narrowed to slits, a sign he was annoyed but intrigued. Inspector, your presence before my breakfast is digested is an imposition. I know nothing beyond what Archie reported last night. Mr. Hawthorne has engaged my services, and I shall confer with him shortly. Unless you have evidence to share, your visit is premature. Kramer snorted, droppings, into a chair uninvited. Evidence. I've got a theater full of witnesses who saw nothing, a dagger that shouldn't exist, and a dead star who owed half the city money. The press is screaming scandal, and the mayor's breathing down my neck. If you're in, Wolfe, I want answers, not your usual runaround. Wolfe leaned back, his fingers interlaced over his ample stomach. Should I undertake the case, you will have your answers, provided you do not interfere. What does your preliminary report show? Kramer hesitated, then tossed a notebook on the table. Beaumont was killed between 9:15 and 9:20 p.m. during a loud scene. Gunshots on screen covered any noise. The dagger went straight to the heart, no defensive wounds. The blade's a custom job, not a standard prop, but it matches one used in the film. Nobody saw anyone approach him in the dark. The usher swears the exits were watched, but someone could have slipped it through the balcony. I chimed in. Otto Klein, the theater manager, mentioned a shadowy figure near the balcony, the stairs before the show. Worth checking, Kramer glared at me. You holding out, Goodwin? Just doing my job, I said, grinning. You want more, get Wolfe a warrant to search the studio. Wolfe waved a hand. Enough. Inspector, you may remain for the interviews if you behave. Archie, prepare the office. By 10:45, I'd set up the office. Wolfe's massive desk, his custom chair that could hold a rhino, the red leather chair for Kramer, and extra seats for the suspects. The globe stood in the corner, the bookshelves loomed with their silent wisdom, and the yellow orchids in a vase added a touch of Wolfe's obsession. I checked my notebook. Vivian Lark, Marcus Vale, Rita Voss, Elias Hawthorne, Silas Grant, Otto Klein. 6 players, each with a motive or a secret, and one of them, or someone else entirely, had plunged a dagger into Lance Beaumont's heart. At 11 sharp, the doorbell rang. Fritz ushered in Elias Hawthorne first, his tailored suit rumpled, his face pale as yesterday's milk. He looked like a man who'd spent the night wrestling nightmares. Mr. Wolfe, he said, sinking into a chair. This is a catastrophe. Lance was the film's draw. Without him, the publicity's toxic. The insurance will cover some losses, but a scandal could ruin me. And Vivian, she's terrified those threats are next. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Miss Hawthorne, begin with the threats to Miss Lark. Details. Hawthorne pulled out a folded note, its edges worn. This came to her dressing room a week ago. Red ink, block letters. Leave him or you're next. There were others, similar. Phone calls, too. Late at night, no voice, just breathing and a whisper to back off. She thought it was about Lance, maybe a jealous ex. Was their relationship public? Wolfe asked. No, they kept it quiet. Studio policy, keeps the fans guessing. But everyone in the cast knew they were close. I made a note. Close how? Lovers? Friends? Hawthorne shrugged. You'd have to ask her. Lance was magnetic. Women flocked to him and he didn't say no. Wolfe's lips twitched. Charming. Now, the dagger, its origin? From the film's prop department, Hawthorne said. We used replicas for a scene, but this one was real. Stolen, maybe, during rehearsals. Before Wolfe could press further, the doorbell rang again. Fritz brought in the others. Vivian Lark, her emerald eyes shadowed with fatigue. Marcus Vale, fidgeting like a man expecting a tax audit. Rita Voss, her cigarette smoke curling like a warning. Silas Grant, the agent, his mustache twitching nervously. And Otto Klein, the theater manager, sweating despite the air conditioning. They took seats, eyeing each other like cats in an alley. Wolfe surveyed them, his gaze sharp as a scalpel. Ladies and gentlemen, a murder has occurred under your noses. Mr. Beaumont's death threatens your enterprise and presumably your safety. I am retained to uncover the truth. Miss Lark, begin with those threats. Vivian's voice was low, husky, like she'd been gargling whiskey. They started 2 weeks ago. Notes in my dressing room, my hotel. Stay away from him. You'll regret it. I thought it was a fan, or maybe Lance's ex, Gloria Dean. She's intense. Proof? Wolfe asked. I threw most out, she admitted. But I kept one. She handed over a crumpled note, red ink glaring. He's not yours. Stop or die, Wolfe passed it to me. I noted the block letters, no fingerprints likely. Miss Lark, I said, where were you when the lights went down? Next to Lance, she said. We were watching the film. I didn't see anything. Nobody did. Vale jumped in, his voice tight. Lance had enemies. Gamblers, he owed thousands. And women, he left a trail of broken hearts. Someone could have followed him to the theater. Rita Voss snorted, exhaling smoke. He was a thief, too. Stole my script ideas, passed them off as his own. But I didn't kill him. I was across the aisle talking to a critic. Wolfe's eyes flicked to Grant. And you, sir? Grant shifted, his mustache quivering. I was in the lobby on the phone with a client. Ask the usher. Klein nodded. I saw him there. But I also saw someone near the balcony. Didn't get a good look. Could have been anyone. Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking. The dagger, its theatricality suggests intent. A message, perhaps. Mr. Hawthorne, the film's plot? Describe it precisely. Hawthorne cleared his throat. It's about a detective, Jack Carver, played by Lance. He uncovers a forgery ring in a movie studio. Fake scripts, fake art, fake lives. Someone kills to keep it secret. It's ironic now. Indeed, Wolfe said. Archie, you will investigate the studio, the prop department, the actors' quarters, and this Gloria. Dean, locator Kramer, silent till now, growled. Wolfe, you're fishing. I've got men on this. You step on my toes, I'll have your license. Wolfe ignored him. Inspector, your presence is noted. Return tomorrow, 6 p.m. space for progress. Now all of you, leave. Archie, escort Miss Lark to her hotel. I followed orders, driving Vivian to the plaza in my convertible, the city's heat pressing down like a lid. She was quiet, her fingers twisting that pearl bracelet. Archie, she said finally, do you think it's my fault? Those threats. Nobody's fault but the killer's, I said. Get some rest. We'll figure it out. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office, a fresh beer in hand. Archie, this murder is a performance, staged for effect. The film holds the key, its plot, its secrets. Tomorrow you pursue the prop master and this ex-lover. I shall think I grinned. Think hard, boss. This one's a real mystery. As I headed to my room, the city's pulse thrummed outside, a noir symphony of horns and shadows. Somewhere, a killer was watching, waiting for the next scene. But Wolfe was on the case, and that meant the curtain was far from falling. Chapter 3. The Suspects Assemble. The afternoon of July 13th, 1952, found the brownstone on West 35th Street humming with an unusual energy, like a hive stirred by an intruder. Fritz had outdone himself with trays of sandwiches, roast beef on rye, cucumber with cream cheese, and a pot of coffee strong enough to fuel a locomotive. Nero Wolfe, having retreated to his plant rooms for his ritual communion with the orchids, descended at precisely 2 p.m., his massive form navigating the stairs with the grace of a barge on the Erie Canal. He settled into his desk chair, a behemoth of yellow leather engineered to his specifications, and rang for beer. I, Archie Goodwin, had spent the morning on the phone, herding the suspects like a cowboy wrangling steers. They arrived in a trickle, each one carrying the weight of the previous night's horror like a bad hangover. First came Elias Hawthorne, still looking like a man who'd lost a bet with fate. He paced the office, his polished shoes clicking on the rug, while I noted his details in my notebook. Mid-40s, silver at the temples, a gold watch chain that screamed success even as his eyes whispered desperation. "Wolfe," he said as my boss entered, "you've got to sort this. The cops are sniffing around the studio, and the papers are calling it the premier slaughter. My investors are spooked." Wolfe grunted, popping the cap on his beer with the opener Fritz provided. "Patience, Mr. Hawthorne." The others. They filed in shortly. Vivian Lark, wrapped in a mink stole despite the heat, her makeup flawless, but her hands betraying a slight tremble. Marcus Vale, the director, his tie askew, and his fingers drumming an anxious tattoo on his knee. Rita Voss, exhaling cigarette smoke like a dragon, her eyes sharp and unyielding. Silas Grant, Beaumont's agent, mopping his brow with a silk handkerchief, and Otto Klein, the theater manager, clutching a ledger as if it were a shield. Inspector Kramer lurked in the red leather chair, his cigar unlit but ever present, watching like a hawk eyeing rabbits. Wolfe surveyed the assembly, his eyes moving slowly from face to face, cataloging expressions, postures, the subtle tells that spoke louder than words. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice a rich baritone that filled the room without effort, "you are here because a man was murdered in your midst, and the threads of motive and opportunity entwine you all. I do not accuse, I inquire. We shall proceed systematically. Miss Lark, elaborate on your relationship with Mr. Beaumont. Vivian straightened, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "Lance and I were involved. It started on set during rehearsals. He was charming, intense, but lately he'd been distant. Those threats, I assumed they were from someone jealous. Maybe Rita here." She shot a glance at Voss, who smirked through a cloud of smoke. "Jealous? Darling, Lance was a cad. He romanced me once too before discarding me like yesterday's script. But threats? Not my style. I prefer words on paper." Wolfe's brows arched. "Miss Voss, you claim Mr. Beaumont stole your ideas. Evidence?" Rita stubbed out her cigarette in the ashtray I'd provided. "He read my early drafts, then pitched similar twists to Vale. The forgery subplot? Mine, but prove it. Scripts evolve." I griped, "But murder?" I was across the aisle chatting with Harlan Fisk, the critic from the Times. "Ask him I jotted that down. Alibi to check." Wolfe turned to Vale. Mr. Vale, your direction of the film? Did Mr. Beaumont cause difficulties? Vale fidgeted, his eyes avoiding the group. Lance was a star but demanding, insisted on script changes, real props for authenticity. That dagger scene, he wanted it gritty. And yes, he owed money. I loaned him $1,000 once, but he paid back. Mostly? Wolfe pressed. Vale shrugged. He shorted me a couple hundred, said he'd square it after the premiere. Silas Grant cleared his throat, his voice oily. Lance's finances were fluid. As his agent, I handled deals, but his gambling was his business. I was in the lobby during the show, phoning a producer about his next gig. The usher can vouch. Otto Klein nodded vigorously. Yes, I saw Mr. Grant at the payphone, but the theater was dark. Anyone could have moved. I was in the booth, monitoring the projection. A figure slipped up the balcony stairs earlier. Tall, hooded coat. Couldn't identify them. Wolfe sipped his beer, his expression thoughtful. The dagger, Mr. Hawthorne, you confirmed it's from the prop department. Who had access? Hawthorne spread his hands. Everyone on set. It went missing a week ago. We thought it was misplaced, but poisoned? The autopsy mentioned traces, curare, or something exotic. Kramer interjected, his voice gruff. Yeah, the lab's confirming. Quick acting, silent. Killer dipped the blade, struck in the dark. Vivian gasped. Poison? That's premeditated. Indeed, Wolfe said. A theatrical weapon for a theatrical kill. Now alibis, Miss Lark beside the victim, Mr. Vale behind, Miss Voss across, Mr. Hawthorne in the box, Mr. Grant, lobby, Mr. Klein, booth. All verifiable, yet the darkness conceals much. I leaned forward. What about motives beyond the obvious? Beaumont's debts, names? Grant hesitated. He owed Louis the Shark, a bookie in Queens. And there was Gloria Dean, his ex. She threatened him publicly last month. Wolfe nodded. Archie, pursue this Louis and Miss Dean tomorrow. For now, the film itself, its parallels to reality. Mr. Vale, the forgery ring in the plot, inspired by what? Vale paled slightly. Just fiction, Rita's idea mostly. Studios have scandals, but nothing real. Rita snorted. Speak for yourself. Hollywood's full of fakes, scripts, stars, fortunes. The room tensed, accusations hovering like smoke. Wolfe rang for more beer, his mind clearly churning. Enough for today. Return if summoned. Inspector, your files on Beaumont's debts, share them. Kramer grumbled, but nodded. Only if you give me something back, Wolfe. As the group filed out, Vivian lingered. Mr. Wolfe, am I safe? Those threats... Archie will escort you, Wolfe said. I did, driving her to the plaza again. The city's afternoon bustle, a stark contrast to the office's intensity. Stay vigilant, I told her. Lock your doors. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the dining room, awaiting Fritz's dinner. Shrimp sautéed in sherry with rice pilaf. Over the meal, he pondered. Archie, the suspects dissemble. Motives layer like an onion. The poison suggests knowledge. Perhaps from the studio's effects department. I nodded. And the shadowy figure, Klein's hedging. I'll hit the streets tomorrow, prop master, bookie, ex-girlfriend. Wolfe sighed contentedly as Fritz served dessert, a chocolate mousse. Satisfactory. This puzzle has flair, but we shall unravel it. Chapter 4. Shadows. In the dark room. The morning of July 14th, 1952, broke over New York with a gray drizzle that matched my mood. The city was a watercolor of wet streets and sullen faces, the kind of day that made you want to stay in bed with a bourbon and a good book. But I had a job to do, and Nero Wolfe wasn't paying me to daydream. Over breakfast, Fritz's scrambled eggs with chives and a side of bacon crisp enough to crack a tooth. I reviewed my plan. Hit the film studio in Queens to grill the prop master about that dagger, then track down Louis the Shark, Beaumont's bookie, and Gloria Dean, his scorned ex. Wolfe, ensconced in his plant rooms, with Theodore and his 10,000 orchids, had given me marching orders. Find the dagger's source, Archie, and probe this Gloria Dean. Her passion may illuminate. I grabbed my fedora, pulled my trench coat tight against the rain, and took a cab to the Monarch Pictures studio in Astoria. The lot was a sprawl of sound stages and warehouses, a maze of dreams built on plywood and ambition. The guard at the gate, a grizzled type with a face like a crumpled paper bag, waved me through after I flashed Hawthorne's name. Inside, the air smelled of sawdust, paint, and desperation. I found Hank Russo, the prop master, in a cluttered shed that could have doubled as a museum of oddities. Swords, goblets, and fake revolvers lined the walls, and Hank, a wiry man in his 60s with tobacco-stained fingers, was sorting through a crate of brass knuckles. "Goodwin, right?" Hank said, squinting. "Hawthorne called. You're sniffing around that dagger." "Got it in one," I said, leaning against a table piled with prop guns. "Ornate, old-looking, real steel. Stolen from your stock?" Hank scratched his stubble. "Yeah, one of 6 we made for Shadows of Deceit. Beaumont wanted them authentic, sharp, heavy. One vanished last week. Thought it was a grip playing a prank, but..." He shrugged. "Someone took it. Anyone on set could have grabbed it. Actors, crew, even visitors." "Visitors?" I pressed. "Sure. Press, investors, hangers-on. Studio's a zoo during pre-production. I noted that. Too many hands, too few eyes." "Any beef with Beaumont?" Hank snorted. "Who didn't? He'd strut in here, barking orders like he owned the place. Pissed off half the crew. But kill him? Nah, that's above my pay grade." I thanked him and moved on, weaving through the lot to the actors' dressing rooms. Beaumont's was locked, but a janitor let me in for a $5. The place was a shrine to ego. Mirrors framed with bulbs, a wardrobe of tailored suits, and a desk littered with fan letters and racing forms. I rifled the drawers, finding a bottle of rye, a stack of IOUS, and a photo of Vivian Lark, her smile warm but her eyes guarded. Tucked behind it was a note, crumpled and smudged. "Pay up or the reel unspools." No signature, but the threat was clear. Blackmail. I pocketed it, my gut telling me it wasn't about gambling debts. Next stop, Queens, a dive bar called the Rusty Anchor, where Louis the Shark held court. The place reeked of stale beer and broken dreams, its clientele a mix of dock workers and lowlifes. Louis was at a corner table, a bull of a man with a gold tooth and knuckles like walnuts. He eyed me as I approached, his grin more threat than welcome. "You Goodwin?" he rumbled. "Heard you're poking into Beaumont's mess." "Word travels," I said, sliding into a chair. "He owed you money." "How much?" Louis sipped his whiskey. 10 grand. Cards, horses, you name it. He was good for it until he wasn't. Said the premiere would square him. And when it didn't? He leaned forward, his breath sour. "I don't kill over debts." Bad for business, but he had other problems. Crossed the wrong dame, maybe. "Gloria Dean?" Louis chuckled. "That one's a firecracker. Showed up at his place last month screaming about betrayal. Checked the Copa. She sings there." I left him to his whiskey and headed to Manhattan, the rain now a steady patter. The Copacabana was quiet in the afternoon, its neon sign dark. But Gloria Dean was rehearsing, her voice a sultry blade cutting through the empty club. She was a blonde with curves that could stop traffic and eyes that promised trouble. I flashed my card and got straight to it. "Beaumont," I said. "You and him, bad breakup?" Gloria paused, her microphone dangling. "Bad. He dumped me for that lark tramp, then spread lies about my career. Said I was washed up. I gave him hell, sure, but I didn't kill him. Night of the premiere, I was here performing. Witnesses? The whole damn band. Ask him." Her alibi sounded solid, but her anger was raw, a wound still bleeding. I left the Copa, my notebook filling with names and grudges. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in his office, a fresh beer in hand, his eyes half closed in that way. That meant his brain was running at full tilt. "Report," he said, not looking up. I laid it out: Hank's missing dagger, the studio's open access, Louis' 10 grand debt, Gloria's fury, and the blackmail note. I handed it over. Wolfe studied it, his lips pursing. "Blackmail," he mused. "Not debts, but secrets. The film, Archie, its plot. You must view it." I groaned, but arranged a private screening at Monarch's projection room that evening. Shadows of deceit unspooled in flickering glory. A detective, Jack Carver, navigating a labyrinth of forged scripts and fake art, betrayed by those closest to him. One scene stopped me cold. A dagger murder in a dark theater, the blade identical to Beaumont's. The parallel was no accident. Back home, over Fritz's veal chops with rosemary, I shared the eerie match. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. The killer apes the film Archie to confuse or to taunt, but why? A personal vendetta or a larger deceit? "Could be both," I said. "The note, the real unspools. Sounds like someone knew the film's secrets." Wolfe nodded, savoring a bite. "Tomorrow, pursue the crew. The Poison, Carrare, Exotic. Check the studio's effects and Gloria Dean. Her alibi, verify it." As I cleared the plates, the city's night hummed outside, a noir pulse of secrets waiting to be cracked. The puzzle was deepening and the shadows were closing in. Chapter 5. The Femme Fatale's Confession. The evening of July 14th, 1952, wrapped New York in a humid embrace. The rain easing into a misty haze that blurred the streetlights like tears on a window pane. Back at the brownstone, I delivered my findings to Nero Wolfe over Fritz's masterful shrimp sautéed in sherry, the aroma mingling with the faint scent of Wolfe's beer. He listened without interruption, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the tablecloth, his mind no doubt assembling the fragments into a mosaic only he could see. "The blackmail note," he said finally, "suggests a hidden reel. Perhaps literal. Secrets embedded in the film itself? Or metaphorical," I countered, spearing the shrimp. "Beaumont had dirt on someone, and they silenced him before it unspooled publicly." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Tomorrow, Archie, verify Gloria Dean's alibi at the Copacabana. And the Poison, curare. Inquire at the studio's special effects department. Exotic toxins aren't standard fare for prop men." I nodded, but before I could elaborate, the doorbell chimed. A rare after-dinner intrusion. Fritz answered, and moments later, Vivian Lark swept into the office, her mink stole dripping mist. Her face a mask of distress streaked with mascara. She collapsed into the red leather chair, her breath coming in ragged bursts. "Mr. Wolfe?" she gasped. "I can't take it anymore. I lied about everything." Wolfe set down his beer, his expression unchanging, but his interest piqued. "Miss Lark, compose yourself. Archie, a brandy for the lady." I poured from the decanter, handing her the glass. She sipped, her hand steadying. "Lance and I, we weren't just involved. We were engaged, secretly. Planned to announce after the film's release. But those threats, they weren't from a jealous fan or Rita. They were from me. I raised an eyebrow. You sent them to yourself? She nodded, tears welling. To throw suspicion elsewhere. Lance was monstrous, charming on screen but off. He hit me, controlled me. I found out he was blackmailing others. Vale, Grant, even Hawthorne. He had files, photos, letters. I confronted him and he laughed, said I'd never leave. Wolfe leaned forward slightly, a monumental effort. And the murder? I didn't do it, she whispered, but I know who might have. Rita, she loved Lance once unrequited. I found a letter in his dressing room, her handwriting, begging him to choose her. Passionate, desperate. If she knew about us... Produce this letter, Wolfe commanded. Vivian reached into her purse, unfolding a scented page. I took it, scanning the words. Lance, my heart bleeds for you. Leave that siren, she's poison. Yours eternally, Rita. The script was elegant, feminine, matching samples I'd seen of Voss's work. Wolfe examined it briefly. Archie, retain this. Miss Lark, why confess now? The guilt, she said, and fear. If the killer targeted Lance, I might be next. Protect me, please. Wolfe sighed. You shall stay here tonight. Fritz will prepare a room. Tomorrow we confront Miss Voss. I escorted Vivian upstairs, her steps hesitant. Back in the office, Wolfe pondered. A femme fatale's confession, Archie. But is it complete? Self-sent threats suggest calculation, yet her terror seems genuine. Or she's playing us, I said, directing suspicion to Rita. Possibly. Tail Miss Voss this evening. Observe her movements. I grabbed my hat and headed out, the mist cloaking the streets in secrecy. Rita Voss lived in a walk-up in Greenwich Village, but she wasn't home. I asked around. A neighbor said she'd headed to a bar called the Inkwell, a writer's haunt. I found it on McDougal Street, a dimly lit den of smoke and scribbled napkins. Rita was at a corner booth, nursing a gin Ricky, arguing with Silas Grant. His pencil mustache twitched as he leaned in. You owe me for keeping quiet, Rita hissed, her voice carrying over the jazz piano. Lance's schemes, I covered for you both. Grant glanced around, spotting me. No, just paranoia. Not here, he muttered. He cut me out too. But with him gone, the evidence dies. Unless Vivian has it, Rita shot back. She's smarter than she acts. They parted, Grant slipping out the back. I tailed Rita to a nearby cafe where she met a shifty type, perhaps a private eye. No exchange, just words. She headed home alone. Back at the brownstone by midnight, I reported to Wolfe, who was in bed but had left instructions for a full account in the morning. Over breakfast, Fritz's omelets with Fine Herbes, I detailed the eavesdropped conversation. Covering tracks, Wolfe mused. Grant embezzled, perhaps. Rita knew. The web tightens. That day, I hit the studio again, targeting the special effects wizard, a lanky Brit named Edgar Poole. His lab was the alchemist's dream, bubbling vials, rubber masks, and shelves of chemicals. Curare? Poole echoed, adjusting his spectacles. Exotic? Yes. Used it once for a jungle flick, paralyzes instantly, but our stock's locked, none missing. Who has keys? I asked. Director, producer, me, and Beaumont. He insisted on realism for his death scene. Another thread. I verified Gloria Dean's alibi. The Copacabana band confirmed her performance. Timestamps matching the murder window. Solid. Evening brought Inspector Kramer, storming in with updates. The dagger's poison confirmed as curare. Traces matching a rare South American variant. Your move, Wolfe, he growled. Wolfe smiled faintly. Patience, Inspector. The confession from Miss Lark illuminates paths. Chapter 6. The Director's Cut. The morning of July 15th, 1952, dawned with a sullen heat that pressed against the brownstone's windows like an unwelcome guest. I was up early, fueled by Fritz's coffee and a plate of blueberry pancakes, my notebook already thick with threads from the Beaumont murder. Nero Wolfe, fresh from his orchid ritual, descended to the dining room at 9 a.m., his expression as sour as the grapefruit juice he sipped. I'd spent the previous night mulling Vivian's confession, her self-sent threats, her claim of Lance's abuse, the letter implicating Rita Voss. It was a tangle of motives, but Wolfe's orders were clear. Dig deeper into the studio, press Marcus Vale, and chase the poison's trail. The Carrara, he'd said last night, is no accident. It requires intent and access. Find the source, Archie. I started with a phone call to Saul Panzer, my go-to operative for discreet digging. Saul, I said, check into Silas Grant's finances. Rita Voss hinted he was skimming from Beaumont. Also, nose around for any studio crew with a grudge against Lance. Saul's voice crackled with his usual confidence. On it, Archie. Give me a day. Then I was off to Monarch Pictures in Astoria, the rain from yesterday replaced by a muggy haze that clung like regret. The studio was quieter today, the crew subdued by the murder's shadow. I found Marcus Vale in his office, a cramped space cluttered with storyboards and empty coffee cups. He looked like he hadn't slept since the premiere, his eyes red-rimmed, his shirt wrinkled. Goodwin, he muttered, lighting a cigarette. You're like a bad script, keeps coming back. Flattering, I said, leaning against the doorframe. Let's talk about Lance. He was blackmailing you, wasn't he? Vale's hand froze mid-drag, his face paling. What the hell are you on about? Don't play coy. Vivian spilled. He had dirt on you, an affair maybe. Spill it, or I tell Kramer you were dodging. He slumped, exhaling smoke like a defeated dragon. All right, damn it. Lance had photos, me and his ex-wife Clara. It was years ago before she married him. He found out, got prints from my darkroom, threatened to leak them unless I gave him a bigger cut of the film's profits. Photos from your darkroom? I pressed. You developed them yourself? Yeah, Vale said. I'm a hands-on guy. Lance swiped the negatives during a set visit. Bastard. I made a mental note. Access to a darkroom meant access to chemicals, maybe even Karari. Where were you when he was stabbed? In my seat behind him. I didn't move, asked Vivian. She was right there. Anyone else know about the blackmail? He shrugged. Clara maybe. She's in LA now. Hated Lance after their divorce. I left Vale to his nicotine and headed to the special effects lab to follow up on the curare. Edgar Poole, the wiry Brit, was mixing a batch of fake blood, his lab a chaos of vials and gadgets. I got straight to it. Edgar, any chance curare was stored here? Maybe mislabeled. Poole adjusted his glasses, frowning. Told you yesterday, Goodwin, our stock's secure. But, he hesitated, glancing at the door. Beaumont wasn't here a lot, poking around. Asked about poisons for authenticity. I showed him the cabinet, locked of course. Only Vale, Hawthorne, Sarviedic, and I have keys. Any signs of tampering? He checked the lock, a heavy padlock that looked untouched. None. But Lance was sneaky. Could have lifted a key. Maybe I filed that away and moved to the prop department again, hoping Hank Russo had remembered something new. He was polishing a fake sword, his face as weathered as the blade. Back again, Goodwin. I told you, that dagger was stolen. No leads. Think harder, I said. Anyone hanging around the prop shed before it went missing? Hank scratched his chin. Now that you mention it, Otto Klein was here a few days before the premiere. Said he was checking security for the theater. Odd, though, he was eyeing the weapons. Otto Klein, the theater manager, poking around props? I thanked Hank and made a note to grill Klein later. Back in Manhattan, I stopped by the Copacabana to double-check Gloria Dean's alibi. The band leader, a guy named Tony with a pompadour that defied gravity, confirmed she'd performed from 8 to 10 p.m. on the premiere night. No breaks, he said. Girl's a pro. Gloria was off the hook, for now. By late afternoon, I was back at the brownstone reporting to Wolfe over Fritz's early dinner. Roast lamb with mint sauce, potatoes au gratin, and a salad that could make a rabbit weep. Wolfe listened, his eyes half closed, as I laid out Vale's blackmail, Poole's locked cabinet, and Klein's suspicious visit. Vale's got motive, I said, but his alibi's tight. Klein's the odd man out. Why's a theater manager sniffing around props? Wolfe sipped his beer, thoughtful. The dagger's placement, precise, poisoned, theatrical. A statement, Archie. The killer knew the film's scene, chose to echo it. Klein's involvement suggests access, perhaps complicity. Or he's a patsy, I said. Someone's framing him. Possibly. Saul's findings? Not in yet. He's quick, but finances take time. Wolfe nodded. The film's forgery plot, too neat. Tomorrow summon Otto Klein and check Beaumont's apartment. Evidence may linger. I spent the evening at Beaumont's Central Park West pad, courtesy of a cooperative super who owed me a favor. The place was still a mess from my first visit. Drawers dumped, papers scattered. I sifted through, finding more IOUs. A love letter from Vivian, pre-engagement syrupy, and a cryptic receipt for film stock special order from a shop in Brooklyn. No address, just a name. Vanguard Supplies. Worth a look. Back home, Wolfe was in the office, a fresh beer in hand. Anything, Archie? Beaumont's place ransacked, but I got a lead. A receipt for special film stock. Could mean something, pursue it, he said. This murder is a reel within a reel. The truth lies in the shadows. As I headed to bed, the city's pulse thrummed outside, a restless beat of secrets and lies. The director's cut was unraveling, but the killer's script was still one step ahead. Chapter 7. The Agent's Gambit. The morning of July 16, 1952, greeted New York with a sticky haze, the kind that made you feel like you were wading through molasses. I was up at 7:30, fueled by Fritz's coffee and a plate of corned beef hash with poached eggs, my mind churning over the threads of the Beaumont murder. Nero Wolfe, still in his plant rooms when I finished breakfast, had left clear instructions the night before. Track down Silas Grant, verify his alibi, and dig into that cryptic receipt from Vanguard Supplies. The agent's role is murky, Archie, he'd said, sipping his beer. His absence from the auditorium during the murder is convenient. Too convenient. My notebook was a tangle of names, motives, and loose ends, but the receipt and Grant's evasions felt like keys to a lock I hadn't yet found. I started with a call to Saul Panzer, who'd promised dirt on Grant's finances. Archie, Saul's voice crackled over the line. Grant's in deep. Embezzled at least 20 grand from Beaumont's earnings over 2 years. Bank records show deposits to a dummy account in Jersey. He's been dodging creditors too. No direct link to the murder, but he's slippery. Thanks, Saul, I said. Keep digging on the crew. Anyone with a beef against Lance? Plenty, Saul replied. I'll have names by tonight. Armed with Saul's intel, I headed to Penn Station, where I'd gotten a tip from a cabbie that Silas Grant was trying to skip town. The station was a zoo, commuters, porters, and the occasional pickpocket weaving through the crowd. I spotted Grant near the ticket counter, his pencil mustache unmistakable, a bulging suitcase at his feet. He was sweating through his suit, eyes darting like a rat in a trap. I sidled up, casual as a Sunday stroll. "Going somewhere, Silas." He jumped, nearly dropping his ticket. "Goodwin." Just a business trip. "Chicago." "Client meeting." "Sure," I said, grabbing his arm. "Let's talk first." Or I called Kramer and let him ask why you're running. Grant's shoulders slumped, and I steered him to a nearby coffee stand, away from the crowd. "Spill it," I said, lighting a cigarette to blend in. "You were skimming from Beaumont. Rita Voss knew, didn't she? That's what you two were arguing about at the inkwell." His mustache twitched. "All right, you got me." I took a cut, small at first. Lance was reckless, blowing cash on cards and dames. I figured he wouldn't miss it, but he found out, threatened to expose me unless I faked those threats to Vivian. "Keep her scared," he said, "so she'd stay close." "You sent the notes?" I asked, leaning in. "Yeah," he admitted, wiping his brow. "Red ink, anonymous, Lance's idea. Said it'd control the narrative. But murder?" I was in the lobby, Goodwin, on the phone with a bookie. The usher saw me. "Check it." I made a note to verify. "What's Lance's angle?" "Why, scare Vivian?" Grant shrugged. "Power trip and money." He was forging autographs, selling fakes to fans. I helped move him through a guy in Brooklyn. Vanguard Supplies, if you must know the receipt. My pulse quickened. "Vanguard, where are they?" "Small shop, Red Hook. Shady, but they move product fast." I let Grant go, warning him to stay put or face Kramer's wrath. His alibi checked out later that day. An usher confirmed he was at the payphone during the murder window, arguing loudly about odds on a horse race. One less suspect, maybe, but his forgery scam opened a new door. I took a cab to Red Hook. The Brooklyn docks a gritty maze of warehouses and cranes. Vanguard Supplies was a hole in the wall, its sign faded, windows grimy. Inside, a wiry guy named Vinny, with a scar across his cheek, was sorting crates of film canisters and printing plates. I flashed my card and got to the point. "You dealt with Lance Beaumont. Forged autographs, maybe more. What's the deal?" Vinny's eyes narrowed, but a 20 loosened his tongue. "Beaumont brought us photos, scripts, stuff to copy, said it was for publicity. We printed, he sold. Paid well, no questions. Last order was film stock, special, high grade. Delivered it to his place a week ago." "Film stock," I pressed. "For what?" "Dunno. He was cagey, said it was for a private project." I left with more questions than answers. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in the office, a fresh beer in hand, his eyes scanning a report from Kramer. I laid out Grant's confession, the forgery scam, and Vanguard's role. "Grant's a crook," I said, "but his alibi holds." "The film stock's weird. Beaumont wasn't shooting home movies." Wolfe's lips pursed. "A private project. Perhaps tied to the blackmail note. The real unspools. The film itself, Archie. Re-examine it for anomalies." I groaned but called Monarch Pictures to set up another screening. That evening in their projection room, shadows of deceit flickered again. I focused on details. The dagger scene, the forged scripts in the plot, a fleeting shot of a document. Blurry, but with the signature that looked like Hawthorne's. Was it part of the story or something else? Over Fritz's dinner, stuffed pork tenderloin with apple chutney, I shared the observation. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. "A signature, you say? The film may conceal evidence of real crimes. Tomorrow summon Otto Klein. His presence at the prop shed is suspect. And the curare checked the studio's medical records. Someone had access." As I cleared the plates, Saul called. Archie, crew gossip, a grip named Tommy Vega hated Beaumont for getting him fired over a script dispute. Also, Klein's been cozy with Hawthorne. Meetings off hours. The net was tightening, but the killer's shadow danced just out of reach. The city's pulse thrummed outside, a noir rhythm of secrets waiting to break. Chapter 8. The Screenwriter's Plot Twist. July 17th, 1952, dawned with a New York sky heavy as a guilty conscience, the heat unrelenting and the air thick with the promise of more secrets. I was up early nursing Fritz's coffee and a plate of waffles with fresh strawberries, my mind tangled in the web of the Beaumont murder. Nero Wolfe, still tending his orchids when I finished breakfast, had been clear last night. Summon Otto Klein. Dig into the studio's medical records for curare traces, and chase down Tommy Vega, the disgruntled grip Saul had flagged. The film's signature Archie, Wolfe had mused, may be no mere prop. It points to a hidden truth. And Klein's movements, suspiciously convenient, I started with a call to Monarch Pictures, arranging for Otto Klein to meet me at the Brownstone at 11 a.m. Then I phoned Saul Panzer for an update. Tommy Vega's a hothead, Saul reported. Fired 2 months ago after Lance accused him of sabotaging a set. He's been working odd jobs in Brooklyn. Check the Blue Star Garage. And Klein? He's been meeting Hawthorne at a diner in Queens late nights. Smells like a payoff. Thanks, Saul, I said. Anything on the curare? Not yet. Studio's cagey about medical logs. You'll need to lean on them. I grabbed my fedora and headed to the Monarch studio in Astoria, the morning haze making the city feel like a noir set. The studio's medical office was a sterile closet, overseen by a nurse named Agnes, a no-nonsense type with a bun tight enough to crack walnuts. I flashed my card and got to the point. Curare, any record of it in your supplies? Agnes frowned, flipping through a ledger. Exotic stuff. We keep basic meds, aspirin, bandages. Special effects handles chemicals like that, but she hesitated, lowering her voice. Beaumont was in here last month asking about antidotes for poisons. Said it was for research. Odd, since he wasn't directing. Anyone else ask about poisons? She shook her head. Just him. And Vale. He signed out some medical texts a while back. Said it was for authenticity. Vale again. I thanked her and moved to the Blue Star Garage in Brooklyn, a greasy joint smelling of oil and resentment. Tommy Vega was under a Chevy, his overall stained. His face a map of grudges. I waited till he slid out, wiping his hands. Tommy, I'm Goodwin. Heard ye had a beef with Lance Beaumont. His Zoes narrowed, dark and hard. That pretty boy got me canned. Claimed I botched a set piece. Pure lies to cover his own screw-up. Cost me my job, but I didn't kill him. Night of the premiere, I was here fixing a truck till midnight. Ask my boss, I noted the alibi to check. You ever hear Beaumont talk about forgeries? Autographs? Scripts? Tommy spat. Heard rumors. He was always scheming, selling fake memorabilia. Wouldn't surprise me if he crossed someone bigger. Back at the Brownstone, Otto. Klein arrived at 11, sweating despite the air conditioning. He clutched his ledger like a life raft, his bald head gleaming. Wolfe settled behind his desk with a beer, fixed him with a stare that could peel paint. Mr. Klein, your presence at the prop shed before the premiere is curious. Explain. Klein fidgeted. Just checking security. Hawthorne asked me to ensure the theater was safe, props included. Indeed, Wolfe said, his tone dry. Yet you lingered near weapons. And your meetings with Mr. Hawthorne, late-night diners, secretive. Why? Klein's face reddened. Business. He's my boss, sort of. Wanted updates on ticket sales, crowd control. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Flummery. You saw a figure near the balcony. Describe them again. Tall hooded coat. Klein stammered. Moved fast. Could have been anyone. Crew. Guessed I jumped in. You didn't report it till after the murder. Covering for someone? No, Klein protested. I was busy, lights projection. I didn't think it mattered till after. Wolfe dismissed him with a wave. Remain available, Mr. Klein. As Klein scurried out, Inspector Kramer barged in, his cigar unlit, but his temper ablaze. Wolfe, you holding out. My lab confirmed the curare, South American, rare, not something you pick up at a drugstore. Wolfe nodded. Noted, Inspector. Archie, the film, revisited. That signature you saw, Hawthorne's, you believe? Maybe, I said. Blurry, but it looked like his. Then arrange another screening, Wolfe ordered, and summon Rita Voss. Her letter to Beaumont suggests deeper motives. I called Monarch for a third screening and tracked down Rita at her village apartment. She agreed to come at 4 p.m., her voice sharp with irritation. The projection room was cold, the film's shadows flickering like ghosts. I watched closely, pausing at the document scene. The signature was Hawthorne's all right on a contract labeled Monarch Assets. A prop or evidence of a real scam. At 4, Rita Voss arrived, cigarette in hand, her eyes defiant. What now, Wolfe? I'm clean. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Miss Voss, your letter to Beaumont, passionate, pleading. Yet you claim no involvement in his death. Clarify. Rita exhaled smoke. I loved him once, stupidly. He used me, stole my ideas. That letter was months old. I was over him. Murder? I was with Harlan Fisk, the critic, during the film. Alibi's solid indeed, Wolfe said. Yet you knew of Mr. Grant's embezzlement. Did you know of Beaumont's forgeries? She froze, then nodded. Heard rumors, autographs, scripts. He bragged about side hustles. I didn't care. My focus was the film. Wolfe leaned back. And the film's plot, forgery in a studio. Inspired by real events? Rita smirked. Maybe. Hollywood's a cesspool. Hawthorne pitched the idea, said it was inspired. Ask. Him, I escorted Rita out, her smoke trailing like a ghost. Back in the office, Wolfe sipped beer. The signature, Archie. If real, it implicates Hawthorne in a scheme Beaumont uncovered. Tomorrow, confront him. And verify Vega's alibi. Over Fritz's dinner, coq au vin with buttered noodles, I mulled the twists. The film was a mirror reflecting crimes both staged and real. The killer's script was unraveling, but the final act was still in shadow. Chapter 9. The Grand Assembly. July 18, 1952, brought a New York morning heavy with heat and tension, the city simmering like a pot about to boil over. I was up at 7, fueled by Fritz's coffee and a plate of eggs. Benedict. My notebook now a labyrinth of clues from the Beaumont murder. Nero Wolfe, descending from his plant rooms at 9, had been emphatic last night. Assemble all suspects for a final showdown. The signature in the film, Archie, he'd said, sipping his beer, is no coincidence. It points to a real crime, and the killer's hand is close. Summon them for 3 p.m. My job was to verify Tommy Vega's alibi, confront Elias Hawthorne about that signature, and tie up loose ends before Wolfe's grand performance. I started with a call to the Blue Star Garage in Brooklyn. The boss, a gruff type named Sal, confirmed Vega's story. Tommy was here till midnight on the 12th, fixing a delivery truck. Got receipts and 2 mechanics as witnesses. Vega's alibi held, striking him from the list. Next, I phoned Saul Panzer for his final report. Archie, he said, Klein's diner meetings with Hawthorne were cash exchanges, small bundles, likely payoffs. And the crew? Nobody else stands out like Vega, but whispers say Hawthorne's been cooking Monarch's books for years. Thanks, Saul, I said. Send the bill. His intel tightened the noose around Hawthorne, whose signature in shadows of deceit on a supposed prop contract felt like a neon sign pointing to fraud. I headed to Monarch Pictures to corner Hawthorne before the afternoon meeting. His office was a fortress of mahogany and cigar smoke, but he looked like a man staring down a firing squad. Goodwin, he said, his voice tight, you're relentless. What now? That signature in the film, I said, leaning on his desk. Yours on a contract labeled Monarch Assets. Prop or real? His face drained of color. A prop, of course. The script called for it. Rita's idea for authenticity. Funny, I said. It looked real. And your late-night cash swaps with Klein, payoffs for what? He stood, fist clenched. You're fishing. I'm clean. We'll see, I said, leaving him to stew. I swung by the projection room for one last look at the film. The signature scene was brief but damning. A contract transferring studio funds, Hawthorne scrawl clear as day. If real, it was evidence of embezzlement, maybe what Beaumont had been blackmailing him over. Back at the brownstone, Fritz was prepping for the suspect's arrival. Coffee, sandwiches, and a tray of petits fours that could tempt a saint. By 3 p.m., the office was packed. Vivian Lark, her emerald eyes wary. Marcus Vale chewing his nails. Rita Voss, cigarette smoldering. Silas Grant, mustache twitching. Otto Klein, clutching his ledger. And Elias Hawthorne, pale as a ghost. Inspector Kramer occupied the red leather chair, his cigar unlit, but his glare burning. Wolfe sat behind his desk, a fresh beer in hand, his presence commanding silence, like a conductor before a symphony. Ladies and gentlemen, Wolfe began, his voice a velvet blade. A murder has been staged, theatrical and precise, to obscure a deeper crime. Mr. Beaumont's death with a poisoned dagger in a darkened theater mirrors the film you created. Motives abound, jealousy, greed, revenge. But the key lies in shadows of deceit itself. Vivian shifted uncomfortably. Vale stared at the floor. Retta exhaled smoke, her eyes defiant. Wolfe continued, the dagger stolen from the prop shed was laced with curare, accessible only to those with studio keys. Mr. Vale, Mr. Hawthorne, Mr. Poole. Mr. Grant, you forged threats to Miss Lark at Beaumont's behest, part of his control. Miss Voss, your passion for him turned to scorn, but your alibi holds. Mr. Klein, your balcony figure, vague, convenient. And Mr. Hawthorne, your signature, in the film, on a contract suggesting fraud, Hawthorne lurched forward. That's absurd. A prop, nothing more. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. Is it? Mr. Beaumont uncovered your scheme, siphoning Monarch's funds through forged contracts. He blackmailed you, threatening to unspool the reel. The murder staged during the premiere echoed the film to create chaos, obscuring your motive. Kramer growled, evidence, Wolfe, or this is hot air. Wolfe raised a hand. Patience, Inspector. The dagger's poison required planning. The killer struck in darkness, unseen, during as a loud scene. But the film itself was tampered with. Post-murder, you'd assume, to match the crime. Wrong. The signature scene was filmed months ago, meaning the killer planned the murder to mimic the film. Vivian gasped. You're saying it was scripted? Precisely, Wolfe said. Mr. Hawthorne, your prints were on the prop box, confirmed by police. Your absence from the box seat during the murder window, verified by an usher, places you near the victim. You stole the dagger, poisoned it, and struck, hoping the film's parallel would confuse. Hawthorne leapt up, face purple. You fat meddler, I'm no killer. I grabbed his arm, pinning him. Easy, pal. Kramer's got cuffs. Wolfe smiled, a rare glint of mischief. But there's a twist, as befits this cinematic charade. Miss Lark, your confession, self-sent threats, an abusive fiancé. True, but incomplete. You knew of Beaumont's blackmail, yes? Vivian nodded, tears brimming. He was a monster. I hated him. Indeed, Wolfe said. And you two had access to the studio. Tomorrow we resolve the final reel. Kramer stood fuming. You're holding out, Wolfe. Finish it. Wolfe sipped his beer. Tomorrow, Inspector. All will be clear. As the suspects filed out, Hawthorne glowering, Vivian trembling, I escorted her to the guest room. The city's night pulsed outside, a noir heartbeat. Wolfe's gambit had set the stage, but the final twist was still in shadow. Chapter 10. The Real Resolution. July 19th, 1952. Dawned with a New York sky bruised purple, the heat unrelenting as if the city itself were holding its breath for the final act of the Beaumont murder. I was up at 6:30, fueled by Fritz's coffee and a plate of French toast with maple syrup. My notebook now a battle-scarred map of clues, lies, and half-truths. Nero Wolfe had orchestrated yesterday's assembly like a maestro, pinning Elias Hawthorne as the prime suspect with his damning signature in shadows of deceit and his fingerprints on the prop box. But Wolfe's cryptic promise of a twist kept me on edge. He'd summoned the suspects back for 11 a.m., and I knew he'd unveil the killer with his usual flair. My job was to tie up one last thread, the special film stock from Vanguard Supplies. Archie, Wolfe had said last night, that stock is no mere prop. It holds the final reel I started with a quick call to Vinny at Vanguard Supplies in Red Hook. The film stock Beaumont ordered, I said. Any chance it was for something other than shadows? Something personal? Vinny's voice was cagey. He didn't say much, but it was 16 millimeters, high grade, not standard for Monarch. Delivered to his apartment, sealed canisters. Looked like he was shooting something private. I thanked him and headed to Beaumont's Central Park West apartment again. The super letting me in with a grunt. The place was still a wreck, drawers yanked, papers strewn, but I focused on the closet where I'd missed a locked metal box on my last visit. A hairpin and some finesse got it open. Inside, two 16-millimeter film canisters labeled private. No projector here, so I tucked them under my arm and raced back to the brownstone, calling Monarch to arrange an urgent screening. At 10, I met a sleepy projectionist at the studio who set up the 16-millimeter reels. The footage was grainy, shot in a dimly lit room. Beaumont's apartment I recognized. It showed him arguing with Hawthorne, their voices muffled but heated, papers with Hawthorne's signature flashing in frame. Another reel captured Beaumont slipping a vial, curare, from a studio cabinet, grinning like a fox. Blackmail evidence, clear as day. Beaumont had been filming his own leverage, a private reel, to expose Hawthorne's fraud. Back at the brownstone by 10:45, Fritz was setting out coffee and pastries for the final showdown. The office filled promptly at 11. Vivian Lark, her eyes red but resolute. Marcus Vale fidgeting like a man expecting a noose. Rita Voss, cigarette unlit but poised. Silas Grant, mustache quivering. Otto Klein, ledger forgotten, face pale. Elias Hawthorne, defiant but sweating. Inspector Kramer hulked in the red leather chair, his cigar a permanent fixture, his patience thinner than a razor. Wolfe sat behind his desk. a fresh beer in hand, his presence a gravitational force. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice a rich baritone cutting through the tension. "The murder of Lance Beaumont was a performance scripted to echo shadows of deceit. Mr. Hawthorne, we established your motive. Beaumont uncovered your embezzlement, forged contracts siphoning Monarch's funds. His blackmail threatened ruin. You stole the dagger, laced it with curare, and struck in the dark. Your absence from the box seat confirmed." Hawthorne lunged forward, voice shrill. "Lies! I'm no murderer." I grabbed his shoulder, pinning him. "Sit, Elias." Let him finish. Wolfe's eyes gleamed with mischief. "But here's the twist. Worthy of your cinematic art. Miss Lark, your confession, self-sent threats, and abusive fiancé was partial. You knew Beaumont's blackmail, yes, but you acted." "You poisoned the dagger," Vivian gasped, her hands flying to her face. "No!" Wolfe raised a hand. "You loved him, then hated him. His abuse drove you to desperation. You had studio access, knew the curare from set visits. You dipped the dagger, passed it to Hawthorne, who believed he was merely staging a scare. But you ensured death, striking during the film's chaos, the loud scene masking your move." The room froze. Rita dropped her cigarette. Vale gaped. Kramer leaned forward, eyes wide. "Proof?" Vivian whispered, tears streaming. "The private reels," Wolfe said. "I produced the canisters describing the footage. Beaumont filmed his blackmail, Hawthorne's fraud, your torment. You found the reels, Vivian, and altered shadows to include the signature scene, framing Hawthorne while planning your revenge. The threats you sent yourself, a diversion, painting you as victim. Hawthorne roared, 'She used me!' Vivian broke, sobbing. 'He was a monster!' Beat me, controlled me. I stole the curare, yes, and poisoned the blade. Hawthorne agreed to plant it, thinking it was a fake to scare Lance. I wanted him dead." Kramer surged to his feet, cuffs out. "You're both under arrest, Vivian for murder, Hawthorne as accessory." I held Hawthorne as Kramer cuffed Vivian, her sobs echoing. Rita, Vale, Grant, and Klein watched, stunned as the police led them out. The office fell silent save for Wolfe's contented sigh as he sipped his beer. "Satisfactory, Archie," he said, "though films remain barbaric." I grinned, pouring a glass of milk. "Next time, I'll bring popcorn." The city's pulse thrummed outside, the noir shadows lifting as the truth unspooled. A real resolution with Wolfe's witty flourish.